You're listening to Salford City Radio 94.4 FM, the Friday Sports Show. Your host, Jimmy Petruzzi. Bringing news from the local area and around the world. We bring Salford to the world to Salford. We're very fortunate in this show to interview some of the world's best athletes, coaches, sports psychologists. With a segment, we also speak to some of the most influential people for psychology and related fields. We really want to increase participation and awareness of sport, but also give us an insight into different roles in sport as well. Today, a very fascinating guest who I've been looking forward to interviewing, and know that you really enjoyed the interview. She's a performance psychologist and culture coach, co-founder of the Prime Clinic and Moonshot series. Is HCPC registered and has been embedded in Olympic sports for the last decade or so. She's trained or worked with some of the best athletes out there, and I'm sure she'll give us a great insight into her work, and I believe she also does some work in business and other areas too. So Katie Warriner, welcome to the show. Great to have you on board.
No worries, thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Yeah, if we start from the beginning, Katie, what inspired you to go into performance psychology?
Yeah, it was perhaps a bit of an unusual one. I was a gymnast when I was a lot younger. I trained pretty seriously from about the age of 6 or 7 through to 16, 17. And I actually had a really difficult... I fell in love with the sport, but I actually ended up falling really out of love with the sport. I had a pretty torrid relationship with my coach. I had a load of mental blocks in the sport, and my mind kind of got in the way of what coaches kept telling me my body could do. So initially I was just really interested to try and understand why that was, and see if I could work with athletes to help them have a better experience and kind of unlock the power of their mind, and also just perhaps to be there for athletes in the way that back then when I was training, sports psychology wasn't really a thing. And so it was really just a sense of trying to help athletes get the best out of their sporting potential, help athletes and coaches connect better, and kind of from there it's just flowed in a number of different directions.
No, it's amazing, and and so in terms of the challenges that sort of along the way, can you sort of share some of the challenges you had in getting to where you are as a performance psychologist?
Yeah, I've been incredibly fortunate. I've been working in Olympic and professional sports for about 15 years now. Was able to be part of the sports psychology team at the last 3 Olympics, so London, Rio and Tokyo. Over the years, I've had some incredible mentors. I've learned a lot from the athletes and coaches that I've been privileged to be working closely with. I think more the challenges have come as I've sort of sought to make a bigger difference, and perhaps the biggest one is around that kind of pursuit of winning. Like I tried to work out once. I think the odds of winning Olympic gold are about 3 in 10 million.
Wow.
It's an epic achievement. But the thing is, like when you work closely with athletes at the very top of their game, sometimes you realise that, like if you see an athlete on a podium with a gold medal around their neck in kind of floods of tears, most people assume they're crying with joy. But actually, when you get close to it, sometimes that's not the case, and that they're almost just like experiencing a sense of relief and almost like, is this it? Yeah. And so I suppose the biggest challenge really I've been thinking about and working with is there's so many different ways to win, and there's so many different types of win, and some are really worth pursuing and frankly others aren't. So trying to help athletes and coaches think a bit more deeply about why they want to be successful and who they want to be when they stand on a podium has consumed a lot of my work in the last few years at the very least.
Yeah, and that's really interesting stuff. And you've spoken about these sort of challenges there. What about the highlights? I mean, you mentioned there obviously working at the Olympic Games, which is sort of no doubt an amazing experience as well. And I know you've done sort of the educational charity as well, and there's a lot you've done to help young people to build resilience as well. But what would you say some of the highlights have been for you up to this point? No doubt there'll be plenty more highlights, Katie, but up to this point now, what would you say the highlights for you have been so far?
So varied, like some which perhaps people might expect, like the first athletes that I coached who won Olympic gold in London in 2012, 2 incredible guys, Tim Bailey and Etienne Stott, in the sport of canoe slalom. And I guess what I loved most about that was just the endeavour, just the wholehearted, like those guys were so passionate. They would sit at the top of a canoe slalom run, just really fascinated by the problems they would try and solve down that run, and that helped them to really thrive under pressure, and we worked really closely as a team and with their coach Nick Smith. It was a really special time, and to be honest, like nobody really expected them to do that. There was a stronger crew out there, and so when they won gold on the day, it was special because of who they were and what they represented. But then I suppose like some of the other highlights, I was thinking about this, There was a moment a number of years back, obviously a very sad time around the Grenfell Tower disaster. I remember really vividly on that day getting a text message from a hockey player that I had been working with. I've been with GB Hockey since 2017. And we'd done some really big work with them around their values and kind of what was important to them in life through their sporting endeavours, but also beyond. And I got this text pop up on my phone saying, I've just taken some time out to drop some kind of aid supplies to the folks over at Grenfell Tower. Obviously it's such a tragedy, and he said in his text, like, I would never have done that before realising what was actually important to me. And so on the one hand, you know, like, you're employed to help athletes win medals ostensibly, but moments like that are so much more meaningful when you think that through sport you're helping people grow into the best version of themselves.
That's really interesting. It's powerful stuff.
I think, like, go on, you go.
You know what I find interesting is, like, you mentioned the work that I think the hockey players about the values, and I mean, like, in general, like, athletes, do they sort of contemplate, just for our listeners, what they're going to do after their career? I mean, obviously an athlete's career is a short time, and some sports a bit longer than others, but generally speaking, it's not going to sort of see, you know, they're going to have to change career at some point. Is that something that you do? Katie, you work with, like, athletes not just on performance related to the sport at the time, but also reflecting on maybe what they can do afterwards too?
Yeah, 100%, and it's growing. I think there's still some sports that are perhaps a bit backward, and athletes or players would think that that's a sign of, like, not being committed if you're thinking about life after sport, and it could be a distraction. Some coaches may be a bit sort of old school in that respect, but that is less and less the case. I think more and more people are realising that actually having more to my identity, like, we actually call it more to me in Olympic sports, and encouraging athletes to take, you know, whether it's a Wednesday through the week where there's no training, to explore hobbies, interests, different career kind of experiences. But when the moment of real pressure comes, to be able to commit everything to that moment when there's no guarantee of an outcome is really enhanced by having more to you than that sport. So more often than not, I find that it like boosts well-being, it boosts performance. There was a footballer that I work with who often, you know, he used to say, like, he used to do some coaching at a local school, and he would often say, I can't be bothered to do it, I'm knackered from training, I've had a bad day of training. But as soon as he got to the school and saw the kids' faces light up, he forgot about training, he was in a better state, and then he could perhaps later on that evening reflect on what had gone wrong in training and kind of make some improvements from it, because he had that other arm to his identity and was exploring that stuff. So I think it really is changing slowly but steadily.
Absolutely. I mean, sort of speaking of football there, I think that's sort of, I know obviously every team's different, I don't want to speak for every team, but, you know, you mentioned the statistics of, like, winning a gold medal in becoming a professional footballer. I think the stats are, once I read somewhere, I think it was 0.01%, and I think that, that more to me, like, thing really sort of resonates in the sense that, you know, is that something that you think in football, you know, it's like, for example, say if you do like a scholarship or like in football, and the chances are very minimal to become a professional. Even if you become a professional, no one knows how long it's going to sort of last anyway. I mean, do you sort of see a place for that in football, Katie, like, to really sort of educate young people on that?
Massively, and I've been incredibly fortunate to co-author a couple of books with Marcus Rashford aimed at kind of inspiring young people to think about what it is they dream of. And, like, I think it's just so important that we help people to form dreams and follow those dreams and work through the setbacks along the way. Whether they get there or not, who they become along the way is probably even more important than anything else. And I think definitely perhaps football a little bit behind some sports in really embracing kind of broader identities. It feels like a really precious short career. But I think the more we can do to encourage athletes from all walks of life and all sports, it's only going to benefit performance and well-being.
Yeah, no, definitely. And do you feel that, like, when you do the sort of the more to me work, I mean, what's the general response you get? You know, Katie, I was sort of thinking that I'm sure there's certain athletes that perhaps, you know, are they sort of really receptive on that? I mean, I know it's not always easy for an athlete. They're kind of really focused on the here and now or the next major tournament.
Yeah.
Would you say they are receptive on sort of, like, you know, life after sport? Or?
I think generally not. The general stance is, no, I just want to talk about how to score more goals, or how to perform better in the here and now. But if you start to kind of skillfully coach and explore with that young person as to what might stop you from being the very best footballer or rugby player or basketballer, like you could be, like actually how they handle the pressure and whether or not they find ways to switch off will almost always come when you ask them the right kinds of questions. So I think if you just got to get on their agenda, haven't you, and understand how they see the world and not push it too hard. But if you just kind of open up space for them to think about things a bit differently, you can normally create a bit of engagement. I think it's also like often a bit of a kind of, I don't want to think about that stuff because I literally don't know, and I don't like the feeling of being so unsure and helpless. So perhaps just normalizing that as well, that it's natural to feel unsure, that the emotions that you have as an athlete are so extreme, high and low. Like it probably is challenging for another career to match that, but that doesn't mean it can't be worthy of exploration and still bring joy into your life.
Yeah, and I sort of guess that balance really. I mean, what I find interesting is obviously like you've got a lot of experience, obviously you sort of studied really hard to get to where you are and that sort of stuff. And I think there's a place for different people in sport. I don't mind listening to sort of motivational speakers myself, so on and so forth. But I suppose in one sense, I was thinking like the other day, a few months ago, where I was listening to a motivational speaker, and I was like, okay, there's some half-truths in what they say, but the reality is I'm sort of living my own life type thing, and so are athletes, and so is everybody else. But and that's the sort of area for me, I suppose. There's that bit of a debate about sort of the regulation of people working in sport. I know it's a difficult question to sort of ask you, I know, but in saying that, where do you kind of sort of stand? I mean, just to give people insight into like what you've done to get to where you are educationally, Katie.
I think like when I first started out, it was really unregulated, and the training routes, frankly, weren't that inspiring. Like I looked at who was on the supervisor list, and they weren't people that inspired me back then. They weren't people that I aspired to be like. I think that's really changing now. And of course, from like the safety of the field, like it's essential that people have gone through the basic qualifications. The bit for me then is, are the qualifications actually fit for purpose? For me, the most, although I'm obviously HCPC registered, I have regular supervision, I do more CPD that is perhaps healthy at times, like driven by my own sense of like wanting to get better. But I have days constantly where I'm a bit lost and confused. I don't know how best to respond, or something feels quite overwhelming. And if I didn't have the kind of mentors around me over the years, I wouldn't be where I am today. So I think it's got to be a broader picture. Like so many different people can make a difference in this space, but essentially, you can also do some damage. You can also waste people's time and money. And I guess the bit I feel most importantly about is that sports careers are short. And so helping athletes maximise that does require a level of skill that all of us in the field are continually trying to improve on. So
absolutely,
there's a responsibility there, I think, from a number of levels.
No, absolutely. Definitely. I'm also like, people coming in and doing talks and sharing their knowledge based on the experience as well. But I think that also the other fine line too for me, Katie, one thing that sort of over the years has kind of concerned me is that fine line between pathology and performance, where, some people may have, like, it's like, for example, when sort of, you get these people sort of try and give explanations for anxiety, depression, and these are kind of areas that, are quite complex, so to speak, and obviously sort of, it's one of them. I think that's the sort of fine line between, okay, an athlete who may need to see clinical help, it might not be performance-related issues that they are having. And is that sort of like something that sort of you guys do in terms of like, in terms of like maybe sort of having a network of people that maybe you can call upon to say, well, this person... Yeah.
100%. And I think there really needs to be more performance clinical psychs or clinical performance psychs. I don't know what phrase you want to give it. I think the thing is, like, ultimately, to be an elite athlete is not normal. The dedication, the path, the choices they make, some people might call it sacrifices. I try and choose the word choice instead. Like, it's not normal, and often it is driven by a level of dysfunction, whether it's a kind of a wound from childhood of I'm not good enough, or I've got something to prove, and that causes them to go above and beyond, which then causes them to achieve above and beyond. So if you're working with athletes, you are probably working with a level of relatively high dysfunction. So having a clinical skill set, I mean, I've always had clinical psychs as supervisors. I've actually always had, my supervisors over the years have been forensic psychologists, clinical psychologists, psychotherapists, are people from different fields that have helped me broaden my kind of understanding of what might be happening in the moment of a one-to-one or a group session.
Absolutely.
Because it's athletes are, they're brilliant, but they're bonkers.
Yeah, absolutely.
So like making sure you don't collude with that, and that you're helping winning in a healthy way, like, whether it's sort of Kath Bishop's done some amazing work around the long win, Pippa Grange on the deep win, like all concepts that overlap. Like, it's really important that like we're championing the very best of sport, not sport at such a high cost that you end up with broken winners.
Absolutely. And also, like, in terms of the work you do, just for our listeners, in terms of, you kind of give us an insight into sort of the people that you've worked with, but just generally speaking, I know it's, in the short time we have, it's difficult to give it, an accurate sort of reflection of what you do, but what generally does a performance psych do? I mean, do you sort of, with the athletes that you kind of mentioned before about the More to Me program, but do you like, are there sort of any specific things that you do, like maybe mental rehearsal, goals?
So varied. I'll try and be concise because it's so fun thinking about it and reflecting on it. I mean, I've always loved having a role with a team as an embedded sports psychologist. So I was 7 years with British canoeing, I was 6 years with England rugby, I've been 7 years with England hockey, so like quite embedded and part of the team's journey. And in that role, it's obviously very holistic, so I tend to think of it in kind of 3 different areas. One is helping them maximise training, so that every time they turn up to training, they're getting the best out of it, they know what they're there for, there's alignment on the purpose and the training load and how that all fits with S&C and the technical coaches. So maximising training gains, and then delivering when it counts, kind of like all the classic mental skills stuff around how they frame pressure, how they communicate, how they make decisions under pressure. And then the background piece of the More to Me that we talked about around mental health, sustaining a positive lifestyle, so that their involvement in sport is one that is positive, not harmful. So those 3 areas combined over the course of a number of years can be a real privilege to work in. But I mean, I actually, there's, outside of that, as you touched on, I work in schools with young people, so I've created a course that distills down the basics of kind of performance psychology, but it can be run in schools as part of PSHE or tutor time, because this stuff, like, this shouldn't just be reserved for the elite few. This is learning how your mind works and how to create a mindset that helps you kind of be your best self. That should be taught as early as possible.
Absolutely.
So I think this work can take us into schools, with businesses. I've done some work with surgeons. Like, performance is an aspect of so many different domains. It's quite a privilege to get to explore that with so many different people.
Absolutely. No, I mean, the skills seem to be really transferable across to many areas. Okay, yeah, definitely. And in terms of like your vision, you okay to sort of share? I mean, obviously, is it more of the same for yourself? I mean, obviously, sort of you've achieved a lot of success over a long period of time. I mean, do you stay motivated yourself? Do you have like? Is it okay to ask where to for you from here, Katie? Like more of the same, or?
Yeah, what a great question, and like what an honour to be asked it. I think initially, like, I had a load of questions like, how developable is the mind? Could I help an athlete win Olympic gold? I just was really curious about that. Having done that, I was then like, okay, can I help a team do that? And then could I help a team repeat that? And I suppose you can continue to be fascinated in that realm. I've definitely found myself gravitating more now to the work with younger people. So can we create an opportunity for every young person in the country to be able to explore their mind and understand their potential and build the skills to be the best they can be, whatever that looks like. Absolutely. I think that's probably where. So it's kind of like I do still work in elite sport. I work with a couple of our British gymnasts and still with hockey, and I'm very passionate about that. I think beyond Paris, that work may come to a bit of an end as I try and turn more towards the younger generation. Don't hold me to that.
No, it sounds really fascinating stuff. And in terms of anyone listening in, sort of want to know more about your work or the sort of course that you offer for the young people or anything else that you're doing, is there anywhere they can sort of like check out your work in more detail?
Yeah, sure. I've actually, having gone 10 years of my career with no websites, I've now randomly ended up with two. One is the primeclinic.co.uk, which is more for the kind of sports psychology and business consultancy and coaching work. And then the stuff with young people is under moonshotseries.co.uk. I think there's a Prime Clinic Instagram and a Moonshot Twitter. I'm also on Twitter, but I'm not super active. But yeah, hopefully, would love anyone to reach out if they want to look into collaborating in any of that stuff.
No, brilliant, absolutely, for sure. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of listeners who've sort of listened in today and are quite fascinated about the work that you do, and many of them probably be familiar with the work that you do as well. But it's been very kind of you to be on the show, Kate. I've really enjoyed speaking to you. It's been fascinating speaking to you. I'm sure the listeners have really enjoyed it too. So thanks again. That was Katie Warriner. It was very kind of her to join us on the show, the Friday Sports Show, 94.4 FM. For your host, Jimmy Petruzzi, we can use from the local area and around the world with our aim of increasing participation and awareness of sport, and give people an insight into different roles in the field of sport as well.